I still remember the moment my father-in-law tossed the janitor uniform onto the table like it was a charity gift. "Sign this," he said, smirking. $35,000 a year. At least you'll be useful." My wife didn't defend me. She just looked away, like I was already beneath her. They thought I was just a poor factory worker who should feel grateful for scraps from their family company. So I signed the contract and stayed silent. What they didn't know was that I owned 47% of that same company, worth $1.4 billion. I never told them because I needed to see how far their disrespect would go, and I needed proof. But the night my lawyer hit send on one email, everything changed. Their power collapsed, their lies exploded, and my wife finally realized the man she humiliated was the one holding the keys to their empire. If you want stories with jaw-dropping twists, karma that hits hard, and lessons about setting boundaries, subscribe to the channel right now, turn on notifications, and stay with me, because this story is about to get wild. Claire's parents' house in Naperville always looked like a picture from a magazine. Clean lines, spotless floors, the kind of kitchen where nobody ever actually cooked. I'd been there enough times to know the routine. Richard talked business, her mother poured wine, and Claire floated between them like she was born to belong there. I wasn't. I came straight from my shift at the plant outside Detroit, still smelling faintly of machine oil no matter how hard I scrubbed. I'd changed into a button-down in the car, but my hands gave me away. They always did. Richard noticed everything. Dinner started the way it always did. Small talk, weather, a quick joke about blue-collar grit that wasn't really a joke. Claire laughed a little too quickly. I chewed slower than usual, keeping my face calm. Then Richard stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and came back carrying something folded over his arm. He laid it on the table like he was placing a gift, a gray janitor uniform, company logo stitched on the chest. Still in plastic, he slid a thin folder beside it. "I talked to HR," he said. "They'll give you a job. Stable, benefits, $35,000 a year. You'll start in maintenance." I looked down at it. The fabric crinkled when his finger tapped the folder. "This way," he continued, "you won't have to keep pretending you're something you're not." Silence settled over the table, heavy and familiar. Her mother didn't even blink. Claire kept her eyes on her plate. The knife in her hand paused, then started cutting again like none of it mattered. I waited for her to say something, anything. She didn't. Richard leaned back in his chair, satisfied, like he'd just restored order to a messy room. "Sign it tonight," he said. "Show some gratitude." My throat tightened. Not enough to show, just enough to remind me I was still human. I opened the folder. The paper was already filled out, my name typed cleanly across the top. He'd decided for me before I even walked through the door. I picked up the pen. Claire finally glanced up. Her eyes flickered, not with anger, not with shame, just caution, like she was watching a dog that might bite. I signed. No speech, no protest. I slid the contract back across the table and folded the uniform without rushing, keeping my hands steady. Richard nodded once, like he'd trained me. Dinner continued. Talk shifted to vacations and property taxes. I answered when spoken to. I smiled when expected. I did everything a good son-in-law was supposed to do. When we left, the air outside hit my face cold and sharp. I walked to the car with the uniform in a bag, Claire beside me, her heels clicking on the driveway. She didn't say a word until I reached for the door handle, and even then, it was barely a whisper. Just, don't make this harder than it needs to be. My hand stayed on the handle, fingers curled around it, and I stared at the dark glass as if I might see the man I used to be in the reflection. I drove into downtown Chicago before the sun was fully up, even though my shift didn't start until evening. Habit, I guess. When you've spent years working plants and warehouses, you learn to show up early because being late costs you more than time. The company headquarters rose out of the street like a polished promise. Glass, steel, a lobby that smelled like money and fresh paint. I parked 2 blocks away and sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel, letting the quiet settle. Claire hadn't texted me good morning. She hadn't asked how I slept. Just one message, short and clipped. "Don't make this a thing. Dad's trying to help." I walked in anyway. The security guard behind the desk looked me up and down. Not rude, just confused. I handed him my ID. "I'm here for onboarding. Maintenance," I said. He typed my name, frowned, then nodded toward the elevators. "Third floor, facilities." Upstairs, a woman in a navy cardigan pushed a clipboard into my hands without looking at my face. "Sign here, initial there." I followed the lines. The paperwork didn't say maintenance. It said janitorial services. That word sat on the page like a stain. She slid a plastic badge toward me. The label under my photo read janitor in block letters. I stared at it longer than I should have. "That's your title," she said, finally meeting my eyes. "I don't make the rules." A man stepped out of a nearby office, tall and restless, with a Bluetooth in one ear like he couldn't bear silence. "You're Marcus?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Tim, facilities manager." He glanced at my badge and smirked like he'd already been told a story. "You'll be on nights, 6 to 2. Orders from Mr. Halden. You keep your head down, you'll be fine." The way he said Mr. Halden didn't sound like respect. It sounded like fear mixed with loyalty. He walked me through the supply room, pointed at a mop bucket, a cart, a set of keys. "Break room is down the hall. Bathrooms are your responsibility. Conference rooms too. And don't touch anything on the executive floor unless I tell you. Those people get weird." A couple of employees passed us in the hallway. A young guy in a tie looked at my badge, then at my face, then quickly looked away. A woman near the elevators gave me a sympathetic smile, the kind people give when they think you've fallen. By noon, I'd already felt it, the quiet shifting around me. People didn't say anything to my face, they didn't have to. The rumor was moving without effort, like smoke. "That's her husband? He's the one Richard's daughter married? Man, that's rough. Guess he couldn't provide." Nobody meant harm. Most of them were just filling space with gossip. Still, every glance added weight to my shoulders. Evening came faster than I wanted. I changed into the uniform in a small locker room that smelled like bleach and old soap. The fabric hung stiff on my body. It didn't fit right. Or maybe it fit exactly the way Richard wanted it to. The first task was simple. Clean a conference room after a late meeting. Wipe the table, empty the trash, straighten the chairs. The kind of work I'd done when I was 17, before I learned to run production lines and safety audits, before I learned how much pride mattered to a man. As I worked, my phone buzzed. "Claire." "How did it go?" she wrote. I didn't answer right away. Another message came in. "Please don't embarrass us. Dad is trying to keep you close, that's all." Close. Like a dog on a leash. I typed a reply, erased it, typed again, then shoved the phone back into my pocket without sending anything. Near midnight, I stepped into the pantry to grab coffee. The room was empty, except for one woman leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching the vending machine swallow her dollar like it had an attitude. She turned her head when I walked in. Elena Ramirez. I'd seen her photo once on an old company newsletter. Former HR director. People still said her name like she'd left a mark. She looked at my badge, then at my face, and she didn't give me pity. She gave me recognition. "Marcus Carter," she said quietly. "Richard really did it." I didn't ask how she knew. Everyone knew everything in places like this. I poured my coffee. The machine sputtered like it was tired too. Elena lowered her voice. "Listen to me," she said. "Keep everything. Every comment, every instruction, every text, especially the ones they think don't matter." My grip tightened around the cup. "Why?" I asked. She gave a small shrug, like the answer was obvious. "Because people like that don't stop at humiliation," she said. "They stop when it costs them something." I stood there for a second, coffee steaming in my hand, and nodded once, then walked back out into the hallway with the cart waiting for me, the badge swinging against my chest as I pushed it toward the next set of doors. The hallway outside the executive floor always stayed quiet after midnight. Most people avoided it unless they had a reason, like the place itself could tell who belonged and who didn't. I pushed my cart along the wall, keys clinking, trash bag dragging soft against the carpet. Two men stood near the elevators, voices low. They didn't see me at first, or maybe they did and didn't care. "It's not adding up," one of them said. "Supplies are short again." "Don't say that too loud," the other muttered. "Richard's already looking for a name to stick on it." A pause. "They're talking about the janitor," the first guy said. "The son-in-law." My hand didn't stop moving. I kept wiping the same spot on the wall like it needed attention, even though the paint looked fine. "You mean Marcus?" the second one asked. "Yeah, him. It's convenient, right? New guy, night shift. always around the storage rooms. They laughed under their breath, not like it was funny, more like it was easy. "He doesn't even know what's coming," the first one said. Their voices faded as they stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and the quiet returned like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second, rag in my hand, listening to the hum of the building. The words stayed. Supplies are short again. Convenient. Night shift. It wasn't the shortage that got to me. It was the casual way they'd already assigned blame. Like the story was written before the facts showed up. I rolled the cart toward the supply room to restock. The key slid into the lock the way it had every night. I turned it. Nothing. I tried again, firmer. Still nothing. The lock didn't give. Tim's voice echoed in my head from the first day. "Don't touch anything on the executive floor unless I tell you." This wasn't the executive floor. This was the storage room I'd been cleaning out of all week. I checked the ring. Same key, same label. It should have worked. A door down the hall opened. Tim stepped out, holding a tablet, looking annoyed like I'd interrupted his peace. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Key's not working," I said. "I need supplies." He didn't look surprised. "Yeah, that changed. New policy. You don't go in there anymore." "Since when?" "Since Richard said so." He said it like that should settle everything, like Richard's name was the only reason needed. Tim tapped on his tablet and nodded toward another closet. "You'll use the backup cabinet, but you need me to open it, or one of the supervisors. You don't have access anymore." A tight feeling settled in my chest, not anger exactly, more like a warning, like my body already knew what my mind hadn't caught up to yet. "Why?" I asked. Tim's eyes flicked away, then back. "Don't make this a thing, Marcus. Just do the job." He walked off, leaving me standing there in the hallway with my cart and a locked door that used to open. I went to the backup cabinet, waited almost 20 minutes before someone came. A supervisor I'd never met unlocked it with a code, watched me grab what I needed, then locked it again like I might steal a roll of paper towels. Back on the janitor cart, I slid my phone out and opened the Notes app. Elena's voice played in my head. "Keep everything." I wrote down the time, the door, the conversation I'd overheard, who said what, where they stood. Then I took a photo of the lock, the one my key no longer fit. A few minutes later, while emptying the trash in a conference room, I found a crumpled piece of paper under the bin liner. It looked like someone had missed it on purpose or by accident. A delivery slip. Item numbers. A signature. I smoothed it out on the table and snapped a picture before folding it into my pocket. The building stayed quiet, but the feeling didn't leave. Something was shifting behind closed doors, and I was being moved around like a piece on a board. I pushed the cart toward the next hallway, badge tapping against my chest, and when the elevator opened at the end of the corridor, I stepped inside without thinking, thumb already hovering over the button for the executive floor. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and before I could step out, my badge reader flashed red. Access denied. A soft beep followed, polite and final. I stood there long enough to feel the heat rise in my face, then backed out as the doors slid shut again. No alarms, no scene. Just a quiet reminder that the building didn't belong to me, no matter whose name sat on my marriage license. By the time I got back to my regular route, my phone had 3 missed calls from Tim. He caught me near the conference rooms, jaw tight, moving fast like he'd been waiting to unload something. "What the hell are you doing riding up there?" he said. "I hit the button by mistake," I answered. He didn't believe me. Didn't matter. "Listen," he snapped. "You're needed upstairs. Big meeting. Richard wants you in there. Now." That made my stomach drop. Nobody needed the janitor at a big meeting. Not unless the janitor was part of the show. We walked through the hallway toward the largest conference room on that floor. I could already hear voices inside. Laughter. A clink of water glasses. The low hum of a company running like a machine. Tim opened the door without knocking and gestured like I was delivering a package. Every head turned. Richard sat at the far end of the long table, suit sharp, hair perfect, holding court. Several managers sat along the sides, laptops open, notepads ready. A few people I'd only seen in passing looked up at me like they were watching something they didn't want to be involved in. Claire was there too. She stood near the wall, arms crossed lightly, wearing a cream-colored blouse that looked expensive without trying. Her face stayed blank, almost calm, like she'd practiced it. Richard smiled when he saw me. Not warmth, not welcome. A smile that said, "Here we go." "Marcus," he said loud enough for everyone. "Come on in." I stepped forward. The carpet felt thick under my shoes, like it was trying to swallow the sound of my footsteps. Richard tapped the table twice. "We have a problem," he announced. "We've had shortages, missing supplies, inventory that doesn't line up." A manager shifted in his seat. Someone else glanced down at their laptop like they could hide there. Richard didn't look at any of them. He looked straight at me. "And guess who's been around those storage rooms at night?" he said. "Guess who suddenly has restricted access because we can't trust him?" A few people blinked hard. A couple of them avoided my eyes entirely. My chest stayed still. Years in manufacturing had taught me how to hold a face when pressure hits. You don't flinch. You don't show panic. You don't feed the wolves. Richard pushed a paper across the table toward me. "Sign this," he said. "Admit the mistake. We'll keep it internal. No police, no drama. You'll be lucky." The page was already filled out. A statement claiming I mishandled company property and caused losses. A place for my signature. Another place for a witness. I didn't touch it. Claire cleared her throat without looking at me. "Just sign it," she said softly. "Please, let's not make this worse." Her words didn't cut. They landed heavy, like a door shutting. She wasn't scared for me. She was scared of the inconvenience. Richard leaned forward, voice rising. "Look at him," he said, gesturing toward me like I was an object. "Thinks he's too good for the mop, too good for honest work. But a man has to know his place." Then he said it. "You're a useless janitor," he snapped, "and you're not going to drag my family down with your pride." The room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. I stared at the paper again, let my eyes travel over the wording, the dates, the vague descriptions that could fit anything, which meant they were designed to fit whatever story Richard needed later. I lifted my gaze and spoke without raising my voice. "Who wrote this?" I asked. Richard's smile twitched. "Doesn't matter." "Who's the witness?" I asked, pointing to the blank line. A few heads turned, small movement, tiny discomfort. Richard's jaw tightened. "Sign it, Marcus." I didn't move. "Is there an incident report?" I asked. "Inventory logs? Camera footage? Anything with a timestamp?" Now people were really looking. Not at me, at Richard. Even if they didn't want to. Questions did that. They pulled attention in directions power didn't like. Richard's face reddened. "Don't play smart with me," he barked. "You sweep floors. That's all you do." I nodded once, slow. "Then it should be easy to prove," I said. The silence stretched. A manager shifted again, and someone at the far end of the table swallowed hard. Richard stood so abruptly his chair scraped. "Get him out," he said. Tim moved first. Two security guards appeared as if they'd been waiting behind the door. One of them grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firm enough to humiliate. I didn't resist, didn't jerk away. That would have given Richard what he wanted. A reason to claim I was aggressive. A reason to call me dangerous. As they walked me toward the exit, I caught Claire's eyes for the first time. She looked right through me. In the hallway, Tim shoved a small sheet of paper into my hand. "Your schedule's changing," he said. "You're cut down to 3 nights. HR will call you tomorrow." The guard let go of my arm, and the skin under his fingers felt hot. I tucked the paper into my pocket without unfolding it, and pushed my cart toward the service elevator, the wheels squeaking louder than usual, my mind already listing times, names, and exactly how many witnesses had been in that room when Richard tried to make me sign my own confession. The next morning, HR did call. The woman on the line kept her tone polite, like she was ordering a coffee. "Marcus, we're putting you on a performance review," she said. "There have been concerns." "Concerns about what?" I asked. A pause, papers shifting. "Inventory discrepancies, failure to follow protocol. You'll receive an email with expectations." She didn't say theft, not out loud. She didn't need to. That word hung behind everything she said. After the call, I drove to pick up my son from school in the suburbs. His backpack looked too big on his shoulders, and he ran toward me like the world was still simple. "Dad, can we get pizza?" he asked, sliding into the passenger seat. "Yeah," I told him. "We can get pizza." He talked about a spelling test, a kid who pushed him at recess, a science project due next week. I listened, nodded, asked questions. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but my mind kept drifting to that conference room. The paper Richard tried to make me sign. The way Claire didn't even blink. At home, while my son did homework at the kitchen table, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. No name, no greeting, just a message. "You're being set up." Under it was a screenshot of an internal email thread. I stared at it long enough for my eyes to focus. Company header, date, names. I recognized 2 managers. Then I saw it. Richard Halden in the chain, not as a recipient, but as the one giving the directive. The email talked about reallocating vendor contracts to a new entity. It wasn't written like a crime. It was written like a routine decision. But the attachment name on the screen said something different. Halden Strategic Holdings, LLC. A shell company. A side door. The message underneath the screenshot came fast. "They're moving supply orders and invoices off the books. When auditors ask questions, they'll blame night shift access. That means you." My stomach tightened. Not fear. Recognition. Because I'd lived this before. Years ago, in my first marriage, my ex-wife had sat across from me in court with tear-stained cheeks and a story that made me sound like a monster. I'd walked in thinking truth was enough. Walked out realizing truth doesn't speak unless you put it on paper and hand it to the right person. That case had cost me time with my son. It had cost me sleep. It had cost me the belief that being decent would protect me. My hands went cold holding the phone. I looked up. My boy was still writing, tongue sticking out slightly the way it always did when he concentrated. He didn't know a thing about corporate games or family politics. He just knew his dad was there. I turned the phone over on the counter, face down, like it might bite. That afternoon I texted Elena. "Need to talk. Today." She didn't ask questions. She sent an address. Lakefront Trail, near the benches by the museum campus. I took my son to Claire's place first. The handoff stayed tense and quiet. Claire acted like everything was normal, but her jaw moved like she was chewing on something bitter. "You've been getting calls," she said as I buckled our son's jacket. "Dad says you're making people nervous." "I'm doing my job," I answered. Her eyes flashed. "Stop acting like you're some victim," she said. "You're embarrassing me." I looked at her for a moment. Not angry, just steady. "I'm not embarrassing you," I said. "I'm inconvenient." Her lips parted, like she wanted to argue, but our son was watching. She swallowed it down and shut the door. At the lake, Elena sat on a bench with a paper cup of coffee, and her coat zipped up to her chin. Wind pushed her hair across her face, and she didn't bother fixing it. I handed her my phone. She studied the screenshot without reacting. No surprise, no shock, just confirmation. "That's Richard," she said. "Yeah." Elena passed the phone back. "They'll keep tightening the rope," she said. "Your badge, your schedule, your reputation. Then they'll say you resigned, and it'll look clean." I watched a couple walk past, laughing, holding hands. Normal life moving on. "So what do I do?" I asked. She turned toward me fully. "Do you want to be safe?" she asked. "Or do you want your life back?" The question landed hard. Not dramatic, just sharp and clean, like a blade pressed against a thread. I didn't answer right away, because the truth came with a cost. Safe meant staying quiet, letting them write the story, taking the blame so my son wouldn't see conflict, swallowing more humiliation until I stopped recognizing myself. My life back meant war, not loud, not messy, but real. It meant choosing truth over peace. Behind us, the water kept moving. People kept jogging. Dogs kept pulling on leashes. I took a breath and looked at Elena. "I want control," I said. She nodded once, like she'd been waiting for that exact sentence. "Then you start collecting everything," she said, "and you stop reacting emotionally. You move like you're already 5 steps ahead." That night, back in my apartment, I opened a folder on my laptop and named it simply Logs. I saved the screenshot. Then I saved the HR email that had come in while I was at the lake. Then I wrote down every name I'd heard in that hallway conversation. I added the time Richard tried to force the confession in front of witnesses. Another message from Claire popped up while I worked. "Why are you doing this to us? Dad says you're ruining the family." I didn't reply. I turned my phone on silent and kept typing, line after line, while the clock on the stove blinked and the quiet of the room filled with the only sound that mattered, keys clicking as I built a record they couldn't erase. The next day I made it through my shift without saying more than necessary. Tim gave me tasks like he was testing obedience. Wipe this, empty that, don't go near the storage room. He watched the whole time, not even trying to hide it. I nodded, worked, left. On my lunch break, I walked 3 blocks to a law office Elena had texted me. No fancy building, no marble lobby, just a clean sign on the door and a receptionist who looked like she'd seen every kind of trouble walk in. "Marcus Carter?" she asked. When I nodded, she buzzed me through and handed me a clipboard. The attorney's name was Daniel Cho, mid-40s, calm eyes, the kind of man who didn't waste words because he didn't need to. He didn't ask me how I felt. He asked what I had. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder. Screenshots, notes, photos, timestamps. The HR call summary I wrote down while it was still fresh. Daniel scrolled slowly, not impressed, not shocked, just focused. "This is good," he said finally. "Not enough yet, but good." "What else do I need?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair. "Patterns," he said. "A timeline. Proof they restricted your access after they started moving things. Proof they talked about making you the scapegoat. Proof they attempted to coerce you into signing a false statement." I nodded. "And if they push this toward criminal accusations?" I asked. He didn't flinch. "Then we hit them first," he said. "Not with noise, with process." He slid a business card toward me. "Do not confront Richard. Do not threaten. Do not argue with your wife over text. You keep collecting. You stay consistent. If you think something is illegal, you don't speculate. You document." I tucked the card in my wallet like it was a key. That evening, I drove to Indiana for a quick stop on the way back from Detroit. Not because I needed anything there, because I needed distance. A place where nobody knew my face, where I could sit in a booth and breathe without being watched. A diner off the highway had burnt coffee and plastic menus. I ordered eggs I didn't really want and opened my laptop. Everything went into the logs folder, a separate document for each day. Times, names, what happened, who said what, where it happened. The humiliation in that conference room didn't go into the file as humiliation. It went in as facts. Richard Halden stated inventory shortages. Richard Halden presented a written confession. Richard Halden demanded signature. Claire Halden Carter stated, "Just sign it, please." Security escorted me out at 12:14 a.m. I wrote it like I was building a case for someone who didn't know me, someone who didn't care about my pain, because that's who matters in the end. On the drive back into Illinois, my phone lit up with an email notification. From IT Security. Unusual login attempt detected. I stared at the screen at a red light, thumb hovering, then opened it. There was a timestamp, an IP address, location listed as somewhere in Chicago I'd never been. I forwarded it to Daniel without writing anything else. 10 minutes later, another message came in, this time from an unknown email address. "Stop digging. You'll regret it." No signature, no details, just a threat tossed like trash. At home, I didn't tell Claire. I didn't ask her what she knew. That part of me, the part that still wanted to believe she'd choose me if I explained it the right way, went quiet. Instead, I changed my passwords, turned on two-factor authentication, printed the IT alert, and placed it in a folder with everything else. The next morning, I drove my son to church on the south side. He liked the choir. He liked the donuts after service. He liked the way older women pinched his cheeks and called him handsome young man. I liked the routine. It made the world feel normal for an hour. After service, while he stood near the pastry table, I sat in my car and watched the parking lot. Habit again. A man learns to watch when life gets unstable. A gray SUV sat across from me, engine running. The driver kept his head down like he was reading something. When I shifted in my seat, the SUV rolled forward slowly, then parked again 2 spaces closer. I didn't move, didn't stare, just noted it. Make, model, plate number. My son climbed into the passenger seat and started talking about the donuts. I listened, smiled, answered him the way a father should. Then I pulled out of the lot, and when I checked the mirror at the first stop sign, the gray SUV turned behind me, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. The gray SUV didn't follow me all the way home. It stayed behind for 3 turns, then peeled off like it had made its point. By the time I reached Detroit the next morning for a quick visit to the plant, my jaw ached from clenching without realizing it. I parked in the lot where I used to park every day, back when my biggest worry was a broken conveyor belt or a late shipment. The security guard at the gate still recognized me. "Marcus," he said, nodding. "You good?" "I'm good," I lied. Inside, I barely made it to the break room before my phone buzzed with an email notification. Subject line: Notice of investigation. I opened it standing by the vending machines. The words hit fast and clean. Allegations of inventory fraud. Violation of protocol. Pending termination. They weren't careful anymore. They weren't even trying to sound fair. They were writing it like the conclusion was already decided. My hands went cold, and for a moment, I felt the same helplessness I'd felt in that courtroom years ago. The same sense that I could do everything right and still lose because someone else controlled the narrative. Then my phone rang. My son's school. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, voice tight. "We received a call this morning claiming there's a dispute about guardianship. We're being asked to verify documents. Do you have legal paperwork we should be aware of?" My throat closed. "Who called you?" I asked. She hesitated. "Richard Holden. He said he's the child's grandfather and that there may be concerns." Concerns. That word again. Always vague, always poisonous. I leaned against the wall, staring at the floor, trying to keep my breathing even. "There is no dispute," I said. "I'm his legal guardian. I can bring you the paperwork today." "We just need clarity," she replied, softer now. "You understand." I did understand. That's what made it worse. They weren't coming for my job anymore. They were coming for my foundation. I ended the call and stood there while the plant noise faded into the background. It felt like blood draining out of my body, leaving nothing but cold. My phone rang again. Claire. I let it go to voicemail once, then twice. On the third call, I picked up. Her voice came through shaky, full of tears that sounded practiced. "What are you doing?" she cried. "Dad says you're attacking him. People are talking. You're making me look stupid." I didn't answer. "Marcus, say something," she pleaded. "Do you hate me that much?" The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing, the sniffle, the pause waiting for me to rush in and fix it like I always did. Instead, I opened my contacts and tapped Daniel Cho's number while she kept talking. "You're being selfish," she said. "You're tearing this family apart." The call connected. Daniel's voice came on, steady. "Marcus?" I spoke into the phone without raising my voice. "They contacted my son's school," I said. "They're moving this beyond work." Claire's crying turned into a quiet gasp on the other end, like she'd just realized I wasn't alone on the line anymore. Daniel didn't ask for details. "Understood," he said. "We move now." I looked at the investigation email again, then at the school's number still on my screen, and I stepped out of the break room into the hallway, already pulling my keys from my pocket, as if my body knew exactly where to go next. Daniel told me to meet him in Chicago that same afternoon. No delays, no back and forth. His tone didn't carry panic, but it carried urgency, the way a man sounds when he knows the next move decides everything. I drove straight from Detroit, hands steady on the wheel, my son's school paperwork sitting on the passenger seat like a reminder of what was actually at stake. Every few minutes my phone buzzed. Emails, missed calls, messages from Claire that I didn't open. Daniel's office felt smaller than it had a few days earlier. Not because the space changed, because I had. He didn't offer coffee this time. He slid a legal pad across the desk and pushed a folder toward me. "You need to understand something," he said. "This isn't just employment law anymore. This is corporate governance. And you have rights you haven't used." I didn't speak. I watched him flip open the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't seen in years, not because I'd forgotten them, but because I'd locked them away like you lock away a weapon you hope you'll never need. A trust agreement, stock certificates, a chart showing ownership percentages. Daniel pointed to one line with the tip of his pen. Marcus Adeyemi Carter, 47.0%. My name looked strange on that paper, too clean, too powerful for the way Richard had been calling me janitor, like it was my identity. I exhaled slowly, not relief exactly, more like a door in my chest cracking open. "It's still valid," Daniel said. "The trust is intact, your shares are intact, and if Richard has been moving money the way you've documented, he's done it while you're one of the largest stakeholders." I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the folder. "They never knew," I said. Daniel shook his head. "They assumed what they wanted," he replied, "and you let them." He didn't say it like blame. He said it like fact. I looked down again at the ownership chart, almost half. Enough to stop anything, enough to force a meeting, enough to freeze decisions if I had to. For years I'd chosen silence because I didn't want to be treated differently. I didn't want my money to become the center of my marriage. I didn't want Richard sniffing around my private life, turning everything into leverage. Now it didn't matter what I wanted. They'd already made it war. Daniel flipped to another page, a list of steps written neatly. Demand independent audit, call special shareholders meeting, issue litigation hold notice, suspend signing authority pending investigation. "We don't walk into the building and announce anything," he said. "We send it correctly. To the board, to council, to the auditors. We make it official." "And Richard?" I asked. Daniel's eyes stayed calm. "He'll deny it," he said. "He'll blame employees. He'll call you unstable. He'll try to make it about your marriage. That's what men like him do when the ground starts shaking." I nodded. I'd already seen it. On cue, my phone buzzed again. This time I glanced. Unknown number. "He's telling people you stole. You'll lose everything." I turned the screen toward Daniel. He didn't blink. "Good," he said. "That means he's scared." I stared at the message, then at the folder with my name on it. My pulse stayed steady, but my thoughts moved fast, lining up pieces like a puzzle finally coming together. Richard wasn't just humiliating me for fun. He was clearing space. He was redirecting contracts, tightening access, planting blame, controlling the narrative. He thought he was doing it to a weak man with no backing. He hadn't considered the possibility that the person he was trying to erase had legal standing to shut his whole operation down. Daniel slid a blank sheet of paper toward me. "Start writing every name you remember," he said. "Every manager in that email thread, every person in that conference room, every IT alert, every witness." I picked up the pen. The tip hovered for half a second. Then I started writing, line after line, while Daniel opened his laptop and began drafting something that sounded like paperwork, but felt like a door finally unlocking. I walked into the building like I belonged there, not because anyone welcomed me, but because my feet knew the way. Tim saw me near the elevators and stopped short. "You're not scheduled," he said. "I'm aware," I replied. He started to say something else, then his phone rang. He stepped aside, eyes darting toward the executive floor, and I kept moving. The conference room was already full. Same long table, same laptops, same guarded faces pretending nothing was wrong. Richard stood near the front, hands spread on the table like he owned the air. Claire was there again, standing off to the side. Her expression looked brittle, like she'd been crying and then wiped it all away. Richard didn't wait for me to sit. "There he is," he announced, voice sharp. "The reason we're here." A few heads turned. Some looked away fast. Others stared, curious, almost hungry for whatever was about to happen. Richard held up a paper like it was evidence. "HR has completed their review," he said. "Effective immediately, Marcus Carter is terminated. Security will escort him out. His badge is deactivated. His access is revoked." He nodded toward the door. 2 guards stepped in. One reached for my arm. I didn't move. Not because I was fearless, because nothing in me wanted to give Richard a reaction he could use. Richard's smile widened. "Finally," he said, "a clean ending." The guard's hand hovered, waiting for me to argue, waiting for me to plead, waiting for me to become the angry black man in their little story. Instead, I looked straight ahead and said nothing. Daniel had told me not to speak unless I had to. He'd already done the speaking. A phone vibrated somewhere at the table. Then another, a third. People glanced down, confused, and started unlocking their screens. Richard's confidence faltered just a fraction. He pulled his own phone out, thumb moving fast, and his face changed as he read. He didn't look angry right away. He looked lost. A board member near the middle of the table cleared his throat and read out loud without meaning to. "To the board of directors and shareholders," he started, then stopped and looked up at me. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Breathing got louder. Richard snapped. "Don't read that," he barked. But it was too late. Everyone had it. Daniel's email didn't use dramatic language. No insults, no threats. Just clean statements and attached documents. Confirmation of Marcus Adeyemi Carter's ownership interest, 47%. A formal demand for an independent audit. A request for a special shareholders meeting. A notice to preserve all records due to suspected diversion of assets. A recommendation to suspend Richard Halden's signing authority pending investigation. Claire's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes went wide, not with sadness but with shock, like the floor had disappeared under her heels. Richard's lips moved, but nothing came out at first. He stared at the table as if the words might rearrange themselves into something he could control. I watched him struggle for air. Then I turned toward the door and walked out. No announcement, no smile, just a steady pace down the hallway, past the guards who didn't touch me this time, into the elevator where the panel lights blinked quietly as I pressed the button for the lobby. The first audit meeting happened without me in the room. Daniel told me that was normal. He said the point wasn't to satisfy my pride. The point was to follow the process clean enough that nobody could twist it later. So I stayed out of the building for a while. I went to work at the plant in Detroit when I needed hours. I took my son to school. I cooked simple meals. I kept my voice even. I answered questions only when I had to. Still, the fallout reached me anyway. One morning Daniel called while I was tightening a bolt on a machine guard. "They suspended Richard," he said. I didn't ask how it happened. I didn't ask who voted. I didn't ask if Richard yelled. Those details didn't matter anymore. Daniel continued. "Signing authority is frozen. The board hired an outside firm. They're pulling emails, invoices, vendor records. A few contracts were routed through that LLC you saw. They're tracing it now." I leaned my shoulder against the machine and listened to the noise of the plant around me. It felt strange to hear the words like they were about someone else's life. "And Claire?" I asked. Daniel paused. "She's been trying to contact you," he said. She had. Voicemails, texts, emails. Some angry, some apologetic. Some written like she was talking to a stranger who happened to wear my name. I never responded. When the partners started backing away from Richard, the company moved fast. Vendors don't like chaos. Banks don't like headlines. People who make deals for a living smell danger quicker than the rest of us. Richard's name showed up in more places than he expected. Suddenly, nobody wanted to be the last person defending him. The board's attorneys sent notices. The auditors asked for explanations Richard couldn't give without incriminating himself. A manager in procurement resigned within a week. Another one asked for immunity before agreeing to talk. Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. "If they find intentional diversion, it goes beyond the company," he said. He could face civil and criminal exposure. I thought about the way Richard had pointed at me in that conference room, calling me useless. I thought about my son's school being dragged into it. I thought about Claire telling me not to embarrass her. I didn't feel joy. I felt clarity. A few days later, Claire showed up at my apartment. I opened the door and saw her standing there without makeup, hair pulled back, eyes swollen like she hadn't slept. She tried to step inside. I stayed in the doorway. "Marcus," she said, voice cracking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it would go this far." I looked at her for a long moment. "You knew enough," I said. Her breath caught. "I was trying to keep peace," she whispered. "No," I said, calm. "You were trying to keep comfort." She started crying, covering her mouth like she could hide it. "Please," she said, "we can fix this." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't remind her of every moment she stayed silent. I just shook my head once. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said. 2 weeks later, I sat in Daniel's office and signed the divorce papers. Claire wasn't there. Her attorney handled it. Everything was clean. No speeches, no last-minute apologies. Just signatures, stamps, and quiet. That afternoon, I picked my son up early. We drove to O'Hare with 2 carry-on bags and a small suitcase. He talked about the plane, the snacks, the window seat. At the terminal, he tugged my hand as we walked past families and business travelers, his voice light. "Dad," he said, "are we really going somewhere new?" I squeezed his hand and kept moving toward the gate while my phone buzzed in my pocket again, a name flashing on the screen that I didn't look at as the line in front of us shifted forward.